Welcome to episode of our documentary series. Today we examine the life of one of history's most controversial and destructive leader. Imagine one man whose decisions changed the course of world history forever. A man who rose from an unknown young artist to the ruler of one of Europe's most powerful nations. His ambition led to a devastating global war, caused immense human suffering, and left millions dead. His name became a symbol of dictatorship, hatred, and destruction. How did this happen? What events shaped his life? And how did his rise end in complete collapse? This documentary explores the life of Adolf Hitler, from his childhood to his rise and fall, using historical evidence to understand how these events unfolded and the lessons history continues to teach. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in the small town of Braunau am Inn, Austria-Hungary, near the border with Germany. His father, Alois Hitler, worked as a customs official and believed in strict discipline. He expected obedience from his children and often insisted that Adolf follow a practical career path. His mother, Clara Hitler, was gentle, caring, and deeply devoted to her family. Historians agree that Adolf shared a much closer relationship with his mother than with his father. During his childhood, the Hitler family moved several times because of Alois's work. Adolf attended different schools, but he rarely showed interest in subjects that required strict discipline. Instead, he preferred history, geography, and especially drawing. From a young age, Adolf dreamed of becoming an artist. He spent hours sketching churches, bridges, buildings, and landscapes. His teachers noticed that he had talent in architectural drawing, although his overall academic performance was inconsistent. As Adolf grew older, disagreements with his father became more frequent. Alois wanted his son to become a government official, believing it would provide financial security and social respect. Adolf, however, refused to abandon his dream of studying art. These constant disagreements created tension at home and influenced many of Adolf's early decisions. In 1903, Adolf's father died unexpectedly. Although the loss changed the family's situation, Adolf believed it also gave him greater freedom to pursue his artistic ambitions. His mother continued to support his dream, encouraging him to improve his drawings and prepare for admission to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, one of the most respected art schools in Europe. In 1907, Adolf traveled to Vienna and confidently submitted his application. The entrance examination included drawings that were carefully evaluated by experienced professors. While they acknowledged his ability to draw buildings and architectural details, they concluded that his work lacked the artistic quality needed for figure painting. His application was rejected. The decision came as a devastating disappointment. Adolf had expected to begin a new life as an art student, but instead he faced uncertainty about his future. Determined not to give up, he stayed in Vienna and continued practicing his artwork while preparing for another attempt. The following year, he applied once again. Unfortunately, the result was the same. The Academy rejected his second application, bringing his dream of becoming a professional artist to an abrupt end. Without admission to art school and with limited financial resources, Adolf remained in Vienna, trying to support himself through small jobs. He painted postcards, city buildings, and landscapes, selling them to local shopkeepers and tourists for modest amounts of money. Life became increasingly difficult. After the death of his mother, Clara Hitler, in 1907, Adolf found himself living alone. His financial situation worsened, and at times he stayed in inexpensive boarding houses and shelters for the homeless. Despite these hardships, he spent many hours reading books and newspapers in public libraries. He developed a strong interest in politics, history, architecture, and German nationalism. Vienna at that time was one of Europe's largest and most diverse cities. People from many cultures, religions, and ethnic backgrounds lived together under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The city was also home to many competing political movements. Nationalist ideas, anti-Semitism, socialism, liberalism, and other political ideologies were widely debated. Historians emphasize that anti-Semitic beliefs already existed in parts of European society during this period. Adolf Hitler later embraced these harmful ideas and expanded them into an extreme ideology that would have catastrophic consequences for millions of people. Many researchers believe that his experiences in Vienna played an important role in shaping the political views he later promoted. In 1913, Adolf Hitler left Austria and moved to Munich, Germany. He admired German culture and believed his future belonged there. Only 1 year later, Europe entered one of the greatest crises in modern history. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated in Sarajevo. The assassination triggered a chain of political and military alliances that quickly escalated into a continent-wide conflict. Within weeks, Europe was at war. The conflict soon became known as the First World War. Like millions of young men across Europe, Adolf Hitler volunteered to serve in the German army. For him, military service represented purpose, patriotism, and an opportunity to contribute to the nation he admired. However, the war would prove far more devastating than anyone had imagined. Its outcome would transform Germany, reshape Europe, and create the conditions that eventually allowed Adolf Hitler to enter politics and begin his rise to power. The battlefields of Europe had become a nightmare. Millions of soldiers fought in muddy trenches, surrounded by constant shellfire, disease, and death. Entire cities were reduced to ruins, and families across the continent lived in fear of telegrams announcing the loss of loved ones. Among those soldiers was Adolf Hitler. For nearly 4 years, he served on the Western Front, witnessing the horrors of modern warfare firsthand. When the war finally ended, Germany was defeated, its empire had collapsed, and its people faced poverty, political unrest, and national humiliation. For Hitler, this moment marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another that would change history forever. When the First World War began in 1914, Adolf Hitler volunteered to join the German army. Although he had been born in Austria-Hungary, he was accepted into a Bavarian regiment and assigned as a dispatch runner, carrying messages between military headquarters and frontline units. It was one of the most dangerous jobs on the battlefield. Dispatch runners often had to cross open ground under heavy artillery fire and machine gun attacks. Many never returned from their missions. Hitler served mainly on the Western Front, where fighting between German, British, French, and later American forces became a brutal war of trenches. Life in the trenches was harsh. Soldiers endured freezing winters, constant rain, poor sanitation, and shortages of food. Rats spread disease, artillery bombardments lasted for days, and attacks often resulted in enormous casualties with little territorial gain. Despite these conditions, Hitler was regarded by his superiors as a disciplined and reliable soldier. He received the Iron Cross, second class, in 1914, and later the Iron Cross, first class, in 1918, an award that was relatively uncommon for someone of his rank. During the war, Hitler was wounded in the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and later suffered temporary blindness after a mustard gas attack in October 1918. While recovering in a military hospital, he received shocking news. Germany had agreed to an armistice. The war was over. On November 11, 1918, Germany officially signed the armistice, ending the First World War. For millions of Germans, the defeat came as a devastating shock. The German Emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, had abdicated, and the centuries-old German Empire came to an end. The country now faced political chaos, economic hardship, and widespread uncertainty. Many returning soldiers struggled to find work. Inflation reduced the value of savings, industries slowed, and shortages affected daily life. In 1919, the victorious Allied powers imposed the Treaty of Versailles on Germany. Under the treaty, Germany accepted responsibility for the war, surrendered territory, reduced the size of its military, and agreed to pay heavy reparations. Many Germans viewed these terms as deeply unfair and humiliating. Historians note that resentment over the treaty became one of several factors that contributed to political instability during the years that followed. At the same time, conspiracy theories about the causes of Germany's defeat began circulating. One of the most harmful was the false stab-in-the-back myth, which wrongly blamed civilians, politicians, and Jewish communities for the military defeat. There is no historical evidence supporting this claim. Modern historians agree that Germany's defeat resulted primarily from military, economic, and strategic factors. However, extremist political groups used these false narratives to spread division and gain public support. Among those influenced by this turbulent environment was Adolf Hitler. After leaving the hospital, Hitler remained in the German army for a short time. Germany was experiencing strikes, revolutions, and violent clashes between political groups. Concerned about revolutionary movements, the army assigned some soldiers to observe newly formed political organizations. In September 1919, Hitler attended a meeting of a small political group called the German Workers' Party, known by its German initials, DAP. The party had only a handful of members and little public influence. During one discussion, Hitler spoke passionately against a speaker whose views he opposed. His powerful speaking style impressed the party's founders, who encouraged him to join. Soon afterward, Hitler became a member. At first, his responsibilities were modest. But he quickly discovered that he had a talent for public speaking. His speeches attracted growing audiences, especially among people frustrated by Germany's economic problems and political instability. As attendance increased, the once small political organization began gaining attention. Over the next 2 years, Hitler became one of the party's most recognizable figures. He argued that Germany needed strong leadership and national unity, while also promoting extremist and discriminatory ideas, including anti-Semitism and aggressive nationalism. These views were based on prejudice rather than evidence and would later become central to the Nazi ideology responsible for widespread persecution, war, and genocide. In 1920, the German Workers' Party changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. The party also adopted a new symbol, the swastika, an ancient symbol that had been used in various cultures for centuries but was appropriated by the Nazis as the emblem of their movement. Because of the Nazi regime's crimes, the symbol is now widely associated with hatred and extremism. Hitler's speeches continued to attract larger crowds. He promised to restore Germany's strength, overturn the Treaty of Versailles, and rebuild national pride. For many struggling Germans, these promises sounded appealing. Yet beneath the powerful rhetoric lay an ideology rooted in intolerance, authoritarianism, and exclusion, ideas that would eventually lead to one of the darkest periods in human history. By the early 1920s, Germany was in crisis. The economy was collapsing. Political violence filled the streets, and many people had lost faith in the new democratic government. Amid this instability, Adolf Hitler believed the time had come to seize power by force. His first attempt would end in failure. Gunfire echoed through the streets of Munich. Several people were killed, Hitler was arrested, and many believed his political career was over. Instead, prison became the place where he reshaped his strategy, and prepared for another attempt, this time through the democratic system itself. Chapter 9, Germany in Crisis, 27:00, 30:00. The years after the First World War were extremely difficult for Germany. The new Weimar Republic faced constant political unrest. Different political groups fought for influence, and violent clashes between extremists became increasingly common. In 1923, Germany experienced one of the worst periods of inflation in modern history. The value of the German currency collapsed. Prices increased so rapidly that workers were often paid several times a day so they could buy food before prices rose again. Families carried bundles of banknotes to purchase basic necessities, and many people lost their life savings. Economic hardship created widespread anger and frustration. Extremist political parties on both the left and the right attempted to take advantage of the situation. Adolf Hitler believed the government was too weak to solve Germany's problems. Inspired in part by political movements elsewhere in Europe, he decided that the Nazi Party should try to seize power through a revolution. On the evening of November 8, 1923, Hitler and armed supporters entered a large beer hall in Munich, where Bavarian political leaders were holding a public meeting. Hitler announced that a national revolution had begun and attempted to gain the support of local officials and the military. The following morning, thousands of Nazi supporters marched through the streets of Munich. However, the authorities refused to join the uprising. Police confronted the marchers near the city center. A brief but deadly exchange of gunfire followed. The attempted coup quickly collapsed. 16 Nazi supporters and 4 police officers were killed. Hitler fled the scene but was arrested 2 days later. The beer hall putsch had failed completely. Many observers believe this marked the end of Hitler's political ambitions. Instead, it became a turning point. Hitler was charged with high treason and brought before a German court in early 1924. During the trial, he used the courtroom as a platform to present his political views. Newspapers across Germany reported his speeches, giving him national attention far beyond what the small Nazi Party had previously enjoyed. Although convicted, Hitler received a relatively lenient sentence of 5 years in Landsberg prison. He ultimately served about 9 months before being released. While in prison, Hitler dictated much of a book that became known as Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. In it, he outlined his political beliefs, including extreme nationalism, racism, anti-Semitism, and the idea that Germany should expand its territory. Historians emphasize that these ideas were based on prejudice and false claims rather than evidence. They later became the ideological foundation of Nazi policies that resulted in persecution, war, and genocide. Prison also gave Hitler time to reflect on his failed coup. He reached an important conclusion. Instead of trying to seize power through violence, he would attempt to gain control through legal political processes. After his release in December 1924, Hitler found that the Nazi Party had weakened during his imprisonment. Membership had declined, internal disagreements had grown, and the party lacked clear direction. Hitler immediately began reorganizing the movement. He strengthened party leadership, expanded local branches across Germany, and focused on disciplined organization. The Nazi Party also created large public rallies designed to attract attention. These events featured carefully planned speeches, flags, uniforms, music, and dramatic ceremonies. Hitler proved to be a highly effective public speaker. His speeches often focused on Germany's economic difficulties, unemployment, and dissatisfaction with the Treaty of Versailles. He promised national recovery, stronger leadership, and renewed pride. At the same time, he blamed Germany's problems on minority groups, political opponents, and conspiracy theories. These claims were false and discriminatory, but they appealed to some people who were frustrated by years of hardship. Throughout the late 1920s, the Nazi Party remained relatively small compared with Germany's larger political parties. However, events beyond anyone's control were about to change the country's future. A global economic disaster was approaching. It would create the conditions that allowed the Nazi Party to grow faster than ever before. Germany stood at a crossroads. The economy was collapsing once again. Millions were unemployed, political parties blamed one another for the nation's problems, and confidence in democracy was fading. In the middle of this crisis, Adolf Hitler promised a different future. He claimed he could restore Germany's strength, rebuild its economy, and unite the nation. Within a few years, he would become Chancellor, dismantle Germany's democratic institutions, lead Europe into the deadliest war in human history, and oversee policies that caused unimaginable suffering. His rise was nearly complete. His downfall would reshape the world forever. In 1929, the world was struck by the Great Depression, a global economic crisis that affected countries across Europe and beyond. Germany was hit especially hard. Businesses closed, banks struggled, and millions of people lost their jobs. Many families faced poverty, and confidence in the Weimar Republic continued to decline. During this period, support for extremist political parties increased. The Nazi Party expanded rapidly by organizing rallies, publishing newspapers, and delivering speeches across the country. Hitler presented himself as a leader who could restore order, strengthen the economy, and reverse the effects of the Treaty of Versailles. In the 1932 elections, the Nazi Party became the largest party in the German parliament, although it did not win an outright majority. After months of political negotiations and instability, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany on January 30, 1933. Some conservative politicians believed they could control him. Instead, Hitler quickly consolidated power. Only weeks after Hitler became Chancellor, the Reichstag, Germany's parliament building, caught fire. The government declared a national emergency. Using the crisis as justification, civil liberties were suspended. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and many legal protections were restricted. Soon afterward, the Enabling Act of 1933 gave Hitler's government the authority to pass laws without parliamentary approval. This marked the effective end of Germany's democratic system. Opposition political parties were banned. Independent labor unions were dissolved. Critics, journalists, and political opponents were arrested. Germany became a one-party dictatorship under Nazi rule. The government also expanded its campaign of persecution against Jewish communities and other groups it targeted. Over time, discriminatory laws stripped many people of their rights, livelihoods, and citizenship. Historians emphasize that these policies were based on racist ideology rather than evidence or legitimate legal principles. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun. During the early years of the conflict, German forces achieved rapid military victories across much of Europe. However, the war expanded dramatically after Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, and later, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States entered the conflict. As the war continued, the Nazi regime carried out systematic persecution and mass murder against millions of people. The Holocaust became one of the darkest chapters in human history. Approximately 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were murdered, alongside millions of other victims, including Romani people, people with disabilities, political prisoners, Soviet prisoners of war, LGBTQ individuals, and others targeted by the Nazi regime. These crimes were carried out through ghettos, forced labor, mass shootings, and extermination camps. The Holocaust remains one of history's clearest examples of the devastating consequences of hatred, racism, anti-Semitism, and authoritarian rule. By 1943, the course of the war had begun to change. Germany suffered major defeats, including the Battle of Stalingrad, which marked a turning point on the Eastern Front. From the west, Allied forces advanced after the D-Day landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944. Meanwhile, Soviet forces pushed steadily toward Berlin from the east. By April 1945, Berlin was surrounded. Hitler remained inside the Führerbunker, an underground shelter beneath the Reich Chancellery. As German defenses collapsed, it became clear that defeat was inevitable. On April 29, 1945, Hitler married Eva Braun. The following day, April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun died in the bunker. According to the historical consensus based on eyewitness testimony and forensic investigations, Hitler died by suicide. Just days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrendered. The war in Europe had ended. The conflict had claimed tens of millions of lives and left much of the continent in ruins. The defeat of Nazi Germany marked the end of Hitler's dictatorship, but the consequences of his actions continue to shape the modern world. After the war, the Nuremberg trials prosecuted leading Nazi officials for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace. These trials established important legal principles that continue to influence international law today. The Holocaust is studied around the world to educate future generations about the dangers of hatred, racism, anti-Semitism, propaganda, and authoritarianism. Museums, memorials, and educational institutions preserve the memories of the victims and remind the world of the importance of protecting human rights and democratic values. Historians continue to examine how economic crises, political instability, propaganda, and extremist ideologies contributed to the rise of the Nazi regime. Understanding this history is not about celebrating those responsible. It is about learning how democratic societies can protect themselves from intolerance, disinformation, and the abuse of power. The story of Adolf Hitler is ultimately not one of greatness, but a warning. A warning of how unchecked extremism, hatred, and dictatorship can lead to catastrophe on a global scale. History cannot be changed. But by studying it honestly and remembering its victims, future generations can work to ensure that such tragedies are never repeated. Thank you for watching The Life of Adolf Hitler, Rise and Fall Complete Documentary. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth historical documentaries that explore the people, events, and decisions that shaped our world. Please hit the subscribe button.